Both chambers of Congress return with packed agendas. The House eyeing ACA subsidies, hearings, and unfinished appropriations, while the Senate juggles confirmations and spending bills. Looming over it all are big 2026 questions. Will January end in a CR or a shutdown? Who might rise or fall in leadership? And whether major legislation like CISA reauthorization, workforce protections, and AI rules can break through the gridlock. Loren Duggan, Deputy News Director at Bloomberg Government, is here with his predictions. Loren, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we're sitting here at the beginning of January. Do you suppose members of Congress made New Year's resolutions?
I'm sure some of them did. They have a lot they want to get done, and this is an election year for them. So, they always start out with fresh optimism when they head toward that.
Well, let's talk about what they've got on their agenda for the coming weeks, I guess, in January. What's up in the House?
Well, I think the overriding thing is going to be the expiration of the Enhanced Affordable Care Act subsidies that we've talked a lot about at the end of the year. Those expired at the end of the year, and there's still a push to do something about that. One of the cliffhangers from last year was this discharge petition to force a vote that enough Republicans sided with Democrats to do that. So we'll be waiting to see how quickly they turn toward that debate and trying to move forward on that issue, because that's certainly going to be top of mind for people, and they probably got an earful from some of their constituents back at home over the holiday break.
Even that discharge petition, though, is likely to meet a dead end in the Senate, yes?
Yes, but it at least moves the ball forward. The House can get a vote, and even some of the members who had signed that on the GOP side said they wanted to just advance the ball and maybe force talks, force some more action. We saw the two Senate votes in December that were the Democratic and Republican plans. Neither had the support they needed to move forward. So we'll see what happens there when they get back in town and look at each other.
And what do you think the Senate will take up first?
Senate's going to do some more nominees. They started work on a few before they broke and said, okay, we'll do the first vote, the cloture vote, if you will, on one side of the new year. And then when they got back, they'll confirm some of those. So, keeping churning those judicial nominees and other folks trying to move more of Trump's nominees forward. So that'll be top of mind for them on the floor, at least, as they try to figure out a bunch of stuff off the floor, which could be more interesting, like spending and healthcare.
I was going to say, I'm surprised that appropriations wasn't first on the list in both chambers. Where are we at on those?
Well, we left with an agreement between the House and Senate top appropriators. That's Representative Tom Cole and Senator Susan Collins. They said they had a top line agreement, and they have to figure out how to turn a top line agreement into the 9 bills remaining to fund the government. When they reopened the government after the shutdown, 3 of the bills were done for the year. 9 still had to go. And January 30th is the date circled on the calendar there. So we're waiting to see what approach the chambers take. Can they get, a few small packages and move those over the line? There had been some talk in the House about maybe doing some mini bus votes where you package a couple of those bills, maybe 2 or 3 at a time, and move them forward. The Senate had been trying to do a 5-bill mini bus package before they left and just kept running into objections and couldn't get all of those cleared before they left. So we'll see if they resume those talks and try to move one of those packages forward before that January 30th deadline, because that is, to your point, going to drive a lot of the discussion.
And some of the political topics that were left hanging at the end of last year were also in line for some sort of big headline hearings. Do you see those actually getting on the agenda and calendared?
Probably. I mean, we saw over the holiday break some discussion about Minnesota and how some child care funds were being used there. That's a hearing they've already scheduled for this week where they're going to bring some people down from Minnesota to answer questions about that. And they want to get Governor Walz, I believe, down there in February to talk as well. So that's a political issue already hitting the calendar. We'll probably see a slow start to hearings in both chambers, but they can ramp up a little more quickly than they do in the odd numbers years when they're forming Congress. This is the second session. Things will start moving more quickly. But yeah, I would expect a lot of hearings to start picking up.
I'm speaking with Loren Duggan. He's the Deputy News Director at Bloomberg Government. Loren, let's turn our attention to predictions. I'm going to ask you to get out your crystal ball, maybe your magic 8 ball. The first question up is continuing resolution or shutdown at the end of January. What's your guess?
I would think maybe a continuing resolution if they can get an agreement on a couple of other things. I do think the ACA could get tied up in there again, but I don't think there's the same appetite to have that fight. We're in an election year now, and maybe some people will see those dynamics differently. So I would assume if they can get maybe some full year bills in a CR, maybe that'll be the path forward. But that will be a key question because that shutdown was painful for a lot of people, and they might want to avoid it again.
Well, that's good news. Second question up, any key leadership changes? We're hearing a lot about members deciding to step down or retire. What does that mean for the leadership of key committees in either chamber?
It might not mean as much today as it will maybe a year from now, where, there's a couple of dynamics there. There's some concern about Republicans that maybe they'll lose control of one or both chambers, and that would obviously have an impact there. On the Senate side, we know that Dick Durbin, who's the number 2 Democrat, is retiring, and Brian Schatz of Hawaii has kind of put his name out there as probably the likely successor there. But, Charles Schumer had some leadership pressures last year with some of the way he handled the initial shutdown fight back in March, and we'll see what that means for him. But yeah, I think we'll see more jockeying over the course of the year for some of the chairmanships opening up for retirement reasons or otherwise. And we're also watching to see if anyone else made a decision over the holidays not to run again this year.
All right. And besides appropriations, there were a lot of legislative priorities that just sort of didn't get addressed by the end of 2025. So let's take a couple of those. Do you think we'll get the longer-term CISA reauthorization through?
That's a good question. We'll have to see what the dynamics are there. There wasn't a lot of movement so far, but they could go for that. And there are, other things and security questions that maybe they'll get dovetailed together. But that's one we'll have to wait and see.
What about federal workforce protections? It seemed like we were starting to mobilize some interest around protecting the federal workforce at the end of last year. Some of those features got included in the shutdown bill, the continuing resolution that got passed at that point. Do you see a mobilization maybe towards more federal workforce protection legislation?
We'll have to see how that pans out, because I think you are right. Maybe that could have been the high water mark, some of the things they got in the government reopening deal, if you will. But there will continue to be pressure on that, and watching how things are playing out in different agencies and watching how court cases continue to go. And so if people can cobble together a majority on some of those things, maybe they'll move them forward.
Crypto and banking was another big topic. Lots of discussion around it. Maybe a lot of heat, but not much light. What do you think?
Crypto will be top of mind. Senate Banking Committee was working on a plan to meet the House-passed market structure bill. There's still interest in doing that. One of the top proponents of that in the Senate has been Cynthia Lummis, a senator from Wyoming, who already announced she'd going to retire at the end of the year, so maybe she'll be even more focused on that. But there is a big push to do something in the crypto space. They passed the stablecoin bill last year. Some people even want to change some of the dynamics of that legislation in a crypto package. So I would think that there's high interest in doing something about that this year.
One more topic, AI regulations. Whether the federal government should do it or the states was a big roundabout. Where do you think that winds up?
There's still interest in doing something about that. The president issued his executive order trying to limit state regulation of that, but I think more people would like to see things done even legislatively. That could be a tough thing to get through. It was part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act debate and fell out during consideration. So the proponents of that haven't given up. So we'll see if that comes up in debates around things like child online safety as well, because there's a push to do that bill in both chambers. And I could see AI regulation coming up in that context as well.
All right. So as Congress gets its feet back under it here at the beginning of January, what are you watching for?
Watching to see how these debates play out and how quickly the FISA debate, that's something that is a kind of a sleeper April deadline to reauthorize Section 702, which I think they put a 2-year extension in 2 years ago. So that's going to be a big fight about government surveillance powers, and one that's not really party line, because you've got kind of coalitions across the parties that'll take sides on that issue with the administration weighing in. So that's a big fight coming early that could dominate a lot of discussion here.
Well, we'll see how things get started. I'm speaking with Loren Duggan. He's the Deputy News Director at Bloomberg Government. Loren, thanks as always.
Thank you.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.
Sean O'Keefe, former Navy Secretary, NASA Administrator, and senior leader across multiple presidential administrations, reflects on the principles that shaped his long federal career. In this episode of Lessons in Leadership, he joined Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA, to discuss motivating teams through uncertainty, leading across agencies, and staying rooted in mission during times of public scrutiny and change.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Sean O'Keefe, former NASA Administrator, former Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget, former Secretary of the Navy, former Comptroller and CFO of the Defense Department, and Professor Emeritus at Syracuse University's Maxwell School of Public Affairs. Welcome. Welcome, and thank you for joining.
Well, thank you, Shane. Delight to be with you. Appreciate it very much.
What first drew you into public service, and when was it evident to you that leadership was an important part of the roles you played?
Well, I grew up around the public service. My dad was a career naval officer. He was a submariner, and we lived all over the place throughout the country. And as a result, I got an up close and personal understanding through him, as well as through all the folks he associated with and the environments he was working in, just what the extraordinary value is of public service and what is it that would motivate people to want to be engaged in it and to be really involving themselves in what is something larger than themselves. And the only place that is really formulated properly is within the public sector and the public service. That again is the beneficiary or the beneficiaries are the citizens of the nation, the community, and the region in which you live.
Did you think about leadership early on, saying, I need to be a great leader, and therefore I'm going to learn how to do it, or did you just naturally evolve into it? Any thoughts on that?
I guess it evolved by the great good fortune of being witness to several really extraordinary leaders, people who really did take the initiative to engage others in the task, to pull together and motivate folks to really contribute their very best to achieve an outcome. And I saw the value of that on multiple occasions and found that was the primary ingredient, the trait, the characteristic that needed to be exhibited is the fundamentals of leadership in moving everyone engaged towards a common objective.
You have served under several presidents. Can you talk a little bit about that? What were there challenges to overcome, or were you away from politics so you didn't get? Talk about that a little bit. How does it differ as you serve through a transition, or does leadership stay the same?
Oh no, it's it's really critically important in transition cases, to be sure. But the two presidents that I served in their administrations were President George H.W. Bush and President George W. Bush in two different eras, obviously. But as a consequence, that was the closest I came to understanding the nature of the individuals who were in that ultimate leadership capacity, and their capability to motivate. Both of them were just extraordinarily inspiring people who motivated everybody to be part of the solution. But most importantly, they also had a capacity of really designating what needed to be done, and you knew that they were perfectly prepared to do it themselves, and that made the task that much more achievable. There were several different circumstances, and understanding what the objectives of the senior leadership are all about.
You've worked for different kinds of organizations, political administrations, and then government departments, agencies, and then private sector, and now academia. How does that affect your leadership style? Or do you find that leadership, the core tenets of leadership, are applicable no matter what the organization you find yourself in and having to lead? It doesn't matter where you are, that the core leadership characteristics are the same? Are they different? Are you adapting?
Well, there's a common myth in my judgment, and I'm probably the minority view of this in the academic field of public management. That common myth is that you can't apply the same principles in the public sector that you do in the private sector.
Yeah.
I never found that to be an impediment.
Okay.
It was always a circumstance where, strategy, the focus on the talent, people engaged, the process to going through decision making, the integrity imperative that must be there in order to demonstrate the absolute conviction of what's intended here, as well as the moral standing of what it is you're attempting to achieve. All those factors are very much the same. It's going to have its nuances, and there are very distinctive, differentiators within those organizations and those sectors. But at the same time, those basic principles, those tenets, foundations of what make up organizations and organization theory, in so many ways are fundamentally the same. And how you employ those may be slightly nuanced to match the condition, but they all are imperative in the same direction.
A little bit of a different direction. You were part of the very first cohort of what is now Presidential Management Intern Program, later became the Presidential Management Fellows Program. What did that early experience teach you about leading within government?
The Presidential Management Intern Program, as it started, was designed for just that purpose, a focus on public management, a focus on implementation. And its evolution over time has been extraordinary. It mystifies me why that has been the subject now of an executive order that has dismantled it. And it's absolutely unconscionable, given the nature of the hundreds, thousands of people who moved through that program in the course of the last nearly 50 years that have gone on in some cases to be senior executives within the federal government, and in other cases they've moved on to other kinds of pursuits. But even with that, even for those who have left the service, they walked away with an appreciation of what public service is all about, why it matters, and why this is so critical to get it right. Because by and large, the reason why these functions are delegated to the public sector is because no one else can do it. Usually that's the case. It takes that kind of focus of a public entity in order to achieve an outcome that frankly would not be achieved in other spheres. So as a result of that, it gave me an incredibly in-depth understanding of that process at a very early stage in my career that has lasted the entirety of that professional experience.
A closing question. Who has influenced your leadership style, and what about their example stays with you? And that question can be cast broadly. So, inside government, outside government, perhaps not government at all, somebody that you've met, reported to, been mentored by, a broad net. But when you think about broadly, when you think about who has influenced you, who comes to mind?
I would have to say that the number one, hands down, greatest influence during the course of my life was my dad. He was an engineer, so everything was a calculated risk. I think I was probably 25 before I realized the answer was not to be found for everything in a slide rule, but that was his bent and his mindset. And he taught me how to think critically. And it really was one of the most extraordinary attributes. And he was an inspiring parent and mentor in so many ways. And all the different things I've done throughout the course of his life, I had the opportunity through much of it to be able to consult with him on a variety of things, and always walked away with a more informed perspective. Dad was an extraordinary public servant in his own right.
Well, Sean, thank you very much for sharing your insights and experiences. It has been a pleasure talking.
I'm delighted to be with you, Shane. Thank you so much for doing this.
And this is Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA, reminding you to empower your team and embrace challenges. Until the next time on Lessons in Leadership.
Find the full podcast and future episodes of Lessons in Leadership on the Federal News Network app and anywhere you enjoy your podcasts.